morning, everyone. We are back to On the Way to the Light. And last month, we stopped here right before Napoleon took power. And we read from the book Light Ahead, Napoleon and Kardec. The next two items of this book are the items Napoleon Bonaparte and then Kardec's birth. So I'm going to bring back the message from Light Ahead from last month, because I think it's important that we're not going to read it, but we're going to stress the important points of it. But before that, let's start reading here this item, Napoleon Bonaparte, and then we read Kardec, and then we comment both of it, okay? So, Raida?
Okay. Napoleon Bonaparte. This lowly Corsican soldier was destined for a great task in the social organization of the 19th century, but he did not grasp the purpose of his great mission. All it took were the victories at Arcourt and Rivoli, with the Treaty of Campo Formio in 1797, and his vanity and ambition completely clouded his thoughts. His expedition to Egypt, long before Waterloo, was assigned to the spirit world regarding how ineffective his effort was going to be. Considering the spirit of pride and imperialism that dominated his transformative energies, beset by the dream of absolute domination, Napoleon was a type of Mohammed who strayed from France's liberalism. Just as the prophet of Islam had barely come near the gospel, which the actions of his life should have validated, Napoleon's activities barely reflected the generous ideas that had led the French people to revolution. His life, too, was full of shining and dark traits, showing that his overall personality wavered between the forces of good and evil. With his victories, he guaranteed the integrity of France itself, but he spread ruin and misery to other nations. As he carried out his task, the civil code was organized, establishing the most wonderful formulas of law, but he indulged in pillaging and scorning the sacred emancipation of others with the movement of his armies in the absorption and annexation of several countries. To the world, his soldier's brow may have been laureled with glorious traditions, and he was, in fact, a missionary from the higher rims, but he was betrayed by his own strengths. Nonetheless, in the afterlife, his heart more strongly felt the amplitude of his deeds, and he saw England's heartless decision to send him into exile on St. Helena as being providential after his request for help and protection. St. Helena represented for his spirit the prologue to the most dolorous and saddest thoughts in his life in the infinite.
Let's read Kardec.
Okay. Allan Kardec. Bonaparte's act of invading others' territories with his activities of transformation and conquest, as he evaded the purpose of his mission to reorganize the French people, compelled the spirit world to take strong measures against his disposition and proud vanity. The time was approaching when Jesus would send the world a consoler in accordance with his auspicious promises. Ardent appeals were addressed to the Divine Master by the guardian spirits of Earth's nations. Numerous assemblies met in the spirit world in the spheres closest to the earth. One of the most lucid disciples of Christ descended to the planet, imbued with his consoling mission, and 2 months before Napoleon made himself emperor, obliging Pope Pius VII to crown him in Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. Allan Kardec was born on October the 3rd, 1804, with the sacred mission of opening the way to Spiritism, the great voice of the consoler promised to the world by the mercy of Jesus Christ.
Okay, so Napoleon was, as we read here, a missionary. First, we have to understand that in a previous incarnation, he was Julius Caesar, the emperor of the Romans, the first emperor of the Romans. Actually, he was never an emperor, but he was the leader of the Romans, just in the transition from the republic to the empire. And so he had this conquering gene in his spirit. But the idea that from the spirit world for him to bring was the spread of the revolutionary ideas that happened in France with the French Revolution, the liberté, égalité, fraternité, liberty, equality, and fraternity, being the ideas that he was supposed to spread throughout Europe, but not through domination, through wars and subjugation, which is what he ended trying to do. So the idea for him was to spread the ideals of the French Revolution that were important for the development of humanity, and of course, greed, pride, and everything else took over, and he thought that his mission was to subjugate all the other people under the French domination. So when he talks here, when Emmanuel talks about his expedition to Egypt, when he became the general counsel in 1797, he did that. He had an expedition to Egypt to conquer Egypt, and it was unsuccessful, and he lost men. He was trapped in Egypt. He was always fighting with the British Empire throughout his reign as the Emperor of France, and actually was his fight with the British Empire that he failed to conquer, and he failed to invade Britain, that he tried to invade Great Britain and failed, and in the end he decided to fight against the English with the economic war, prohibiting all the other European kingdoms, countries, and participants to deal with England in the sense that he was trying to suffocate the United Kingdom economically. United Kingdom was formed in 1801 by the union of the Kingdom of Great Britain, which is the island where you have Wales, Scotland, and England, and the Kingdom of Ireland, where you have nowadays you have Northern Ireland and Ireland. At that time was just the Kingdom of Ireland. That is what is the United Kingdom. But where Napoleon failed in this idea of causing economic harm to Great Britain was that in the end there was always ways of circumventing, and Russia, which was a great empire of Europe at that time, decided to negotiate with Great Britain anyways, and Napoleon then decided to invade Russia, and that was what caused him the end of his emperor reign, as they say in history. He was defeated by the General Winter, right? Because it was the winter in Russia that defeated Napoleon. But On the other hand, if you look at the book in the history books, the only invader to ever reach Moscow was Napoleon. The Russian retreated and retreated and retreated and allowed the winter to defeat him. So he lost all his most of his army. He had to go back to Paris, and he was so weakened when he returned that he ended up being defeated by the British and sent to Elba. It's an island where he stayed for some months, and then he went back to France to try to reconquer the power. And briefly he reconquered the power, but he had no military strength anymore. And he ended up being defeated again in the famous Battle of Waterloo by the British, and was sent to this island called Santa Helena, where he spent the rest of his days. It is said that he had some form of cancer. That famous picture or presentation of him with his hand in the hand in his belly, it's probably because he had pain in that region. That was a consequence of some form of cancer that they believed he had. So he ended up dying in Santa Helena in 1821. So you see here the importance that Emmanuel talks about the mission that Napoleon came to do here, and a lot of things that he built, the famous civil code that was organized, some things that he implanted in the government are used up to this day in France. So of course it was not wasted his time in France. He brought some prosperity to France, and a lot of what France ended up being the leader of the world in the 19th century was due also to what Napoleon did. So Napoleon began the transformation of Europe, and the 19th century that we're going to talk about it, which is a very important century in terms of development in the, in all aspects, in scientific, religious, arts, and also the organization of Europe as we have it Europe today happened in the 19th century. So at the same time, something else was happening in the spiritual world, and we see here when they say about when Emmanuel talks about that Napoleon evaded the purpose of his mission to reorganize the French people. The idea was to take strong measures against despotism and proud vanity, right? And so that's when Kardec was born in 1804. Numerous assemblies met in the spirit world in the spheres closest to Earth. And that's what we read last month, and that's what we're going to bring back here. The message by Brother X, Humberto de Campos, on Napoleon and Kardec. Kardec was born on October 3rd, 1804, some 2 months before Napoleon crowned himself emperor, which was in December of 1804, and he forced the Pope to, he invited the Pope Pius VII to his coronation, and when the Pope arrived and in the coronation, he took the Pope's crown and put the crown on his own head. So that's why they said obliging Pope Pius VII to crown him. So he took the crown and he made himself the emperor of the world as he wanted to be. And of course, these things never end well. So let me bring back the message so we can talk a little bit about the the message from Brother X of Kardec and Napoleon. So as they say, I'm not going to read again, it's a long message, but I'm just going to comment on parts of it. So the 18 Brumaire, which is November 9, 1799, was when Kardec was, when Napoleon was appointed first consul of the French Republic. So on December 31st of the same year, as you were changing centuries, a group of spirits, wise and benevolent spirits, gathered in the heart of the Latin spiritual quarters, where there you have ancient personalities from Imperial Rome, figures linked to Spain, Caesars, numerous representatives from the Americas that was to become an important part of the world. And Brother X says here, renowned Jews, illustrious Greeks, Slavic and Germanic delegations, great figures of England, Chinese, Hindu, Buddhist, priests of Olympian deities, followers of Muhammad, renowned clerics of Roman Church. All of them reunited in this congregation, these delegations. Also, he said some important names here: Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Apollonius of Tyana, Origen, Hippocrates, Augustine, Fenelon, that we have messages in the Gospel according to Spiritism, Giordano Bruno, Thomas Aquinas, Louis IX, which is was King Saint Louis, the King of France, Vincent de Paul, Joan of Arc, which was the one that we study about her, that freed France also through wars, and was the reincarnation of Judas. Teresa of Avila, Catherine of Siena, two very important saints and figures in the growth of Christianity. Bossuet, Spinoza, Erasmus, Milton, Christopher Columbus, Gutenberg, responsible for the free press, for invention of the press, Galileo, Pascal, that we read a message last week on the Gospel, Swedenborg, Emmanuel Swedenborg, a predecessor of Spiritism that wrote Heaven and Hell in the end of the 18th century, Dante Alighieri, that wrote the Inferno and the beautiful books that still represent so well hell and a little less effective heaven, just to mention a few of them. Plus, of course, the recent deceased guillotined by the French Revolution, Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, Robespierre, Danton, Madame Roland, Chenier, Bailly, Camille Desmoulins, and other great figures as Voltaire and Rousseau. So they are all reunited, and then a group of spirits are brought from, because these are still incarnated spirits, and they are brought ahead of them Napoleon, typical in his typical garments and his hat. And he was greeted by several figures from ancient Rome. Why? Because again, he's Julius Caesar. Napoleon is Julius Caesar reincarnated. They offered their aid and support, and he took seat on the chair. And then there were also some reincarnated famous people at the time: Beethoven, Ampere, Fulton, Faraday, Goethe, John Dalton, Pestalozzi, which was the teacher of Kardec. Kardec studied with Pestalozzi in the Pestalozzi Institute in Yverdon, Switzerland, from an early age until he returned to France to continue his studies there. So a very important figure in the education of Kardec. And the Pope Pius VII, which we just read, that was Napoleon forced to go to France to crown him. So At this time, a pathway light similar to a drawbridge was projected from the sky, and upon reaching the delicate ground, these stars transform into human beings covered in radiant celestial light. Among them all, there was one who excelled in superiority and beauty, a brilliant diadem shine on his head and surrounding with blessing, his gaze filled with tenderness and strength. In his right hand, a gold scepter shone in sublime scintillations. This is the Spirit of Truth that is appearing in front of them. Musician was playing. Napoleon started to weep, impressed by the figure, and he stood up and headed with great difficulty toward the messenger. So, you know, when we see a figure of this magnitude, your reaction is to become very emotive, and only the energy is enough for you to become very impressed. So the Spirit of Truth then started his message that we read last week, and we're going to just read some passages. Brother and friend, listen to the truth which in my spirit speaks to you. You stand before the apostle of the faith which, under Christ's shield, will release a new cycle of knowledge in the tormented earth. Yesterday, Caesar, there you have the confirmation of him as Julius Caesar, and today a guiding leader. Surrender the cult of your adoration to the pontiff of the light. That's what he did. He didn't do. Reaffirm before the gospel your commitment to aid it in its mission of renewal. And then he talks about those that are reunited there. And he continues, do not believe that the victories you were vested by the consulate should be attributed exclusively to your military and political genius. The will of the Lord expresses itself in the circumstances of life. Invest yourself with courage to govern without ambition and to rule without hatred. Draw on prayer and humility to avoid precipitating yourself down the cliffs of tyranny and violence. So he was advised to be careful with the power, but of course we know he didn't follow these advices, right? Do not be fascinated by vanity, which will seek to set a crown on your head. Remember the suffering of the French people. If you honor your promises, you will accomplish your mission with the recognition of posterity and you climb higher horizons of life. However, if your responsibilities are neglected, grim torments will heap onto your days, which will become dismal lamentations in a vast desert, which is telling him that if he fails on his mission, he will end up his days in, he talks about a vast desert. It's the island of Santa Helena where he was isolated and was on a small island that has nothing. And then the Spirit of Truth tells that in the new century we begin the preparation for the third millennium of Christianity on earth. New concepts of freedom will surface for humankind. Science will elevate itself to indefinable heights. Cultured nations will forever abandon slavery and the traffic of free people. And religion will release the chains of the mind, which up to now have been locking up the best aspirations of the soul in a hell without mercy. All of this happened with or without Napoleon. It was going to happen anyway. So science freed itself from religion in the 19th century. Slavery was abolished throughout the century. In starting Britain and continuing throughout all the countries in this country here with the Civil War in 1865, in Brazil the last one in 1888. So by the end of the 19th century, official slavery no longer existed. Of course, we still can talk about slavery up to these days because we have cases here and there, but they are not. It's not legal. And religion will release the chains of the mind, which means that religious freedom would start to develop in the different in the different places. Of course, we are not there yet. We still have a lot of religious impositions and domination, but nobody is forced to follow any religion. Free will in most parts of the world allow us to choose to follow a religion if we want to or not. Again, in general, there are places where you still have to submit yourself to the religious domination of the countries. So the Spirit of Truth continues, we entrust therefore to your valorous spirit the political administration of the impending events. May the Lord bless you. And then the Spirit of Truth returned to the heights, followed by several resplendent cohorts, and the assembly started to dissolve. The apostle who would later become Allan Kardec, holding Napoleon's arm, drew him closer to his heart and stayed with him, caringly until he reconnected him to his carnal body in his own bed. And then on October 3, 1804, we just read, the messenger of renewal was reborn in a blessed home in Lyon, whereas the first consul of the French Republic, as soon as he found himself free of the protecting and beneficial influence of Kardec's spirit and his cooperators, who one by one resumed confidently and optimistically their journey in a carnal body, adorned himself with the purple robe of power, and inebriated by it, proclaimed himself emperor on May 18, 1804, commanding Pius VII to come to Paris to crown him. Napoleon, nevertheless, after converting celestial concessions into bloody adventures, was hastily relocated by determination from the on high to the healing solitude of St. Helena, where he awaited death, while Allan Kardec, concealing his own greatness, living as a simple man of the people in the humblessness of a schoolmaster, many times tormented and disappointed, accomplished entirely the divine mission he brought to earth, initiating the Christian Spiritist era, which gradually will be considered in all quadrants of the earth as the sublime revival of the light for the entire world. So again, this is from Brother X, Humberto de Campos, that Elmo talked about him in our anniversary, SGNY's anniversary, when we were talking about another message of him. The book is Letters and Chronicles, still not translated, Cartas and Crónicas, but it is published on the book Light Ahead. It was just published by the United States Spiritist Federation. Okay, so let's go back to our book On the Way to the Light. So you see here, I think it's an important part of this book. I think it was important for us to go back to the message from Brother X, as we discussed Napoleon and Kardec, and the importance of his reign as Emperor of France, even if he somewhat failed in his mission to spread the French ideas of that time to the rest of the world, especially to Europe. He started something. He started a process, and all his wars against the other kingdoms in Europe draw the new map of Europe, helped end the church domination, caused in the end of the century to the formation of Italy as an independent country and the Vatican to separate from it. Germany was formed during the 19th century. The growth of the British Empire in the 19th century also became more and more important, but within always bringing some of the ideas. Remember that French was the official language of the international community. Still it is up to today, but much more at that time. Diplomacy was all done in French, and the ideas of the French Revolution that were spread and used here in this country, in the US also, through Thomas Jefferson and the forefathers of the United States revolution, independence, was all inspired and brought with these spirits that united themselves at the time of the change of humanity from the absolutism that was that ruled the world for many centuries to some latent ideas of freedom that began to develop in all countries. That we know that transformations take time, and it's still being transformed, but the freedom that we have today is thankful to what started in France 200 years ago, more or less. So we're going to continue talking about the 19th century in the next chapter, but I think it's important that we reinforce here the importance of Napoleon in terms of everything that happened in Europe, and for ourselves in Spiritism, the importance of Kardec and the beginning, where it all began. And we know that he started Spiritism in 1857. So before that, he was, as I mentioned before, he was educated by Pestalozzi and the Pestalozzi Institute. Pestalozzi was a revolutionary in terms of education in Yverdon, Switzerland. Kardec had to leave France because France had the imposition of religious education, and every curriculum in the schools were dominated by the church. So Kardec was sent by his mother to study in Yverdon, which was in Switzerland, which still is in Switzerland. So he would have freedom to study, and he became an educator. He published several books with the name of Hippolyte Léon Denisard Rivail, that are, some of them are still used in the French education system. He was a professor in several subjects, and that's why it was all this preparation was very important for him to codify Spiritism. All his preparation as a scholar allowed him to be a very efficient and organized person in terms of organizing Spiritism. That we can see that he starts when he was almost 50 years old, because in 1855 is when he first starts contacting the turning tables and start being interested in Spiritism. Okay? All right. I spoke a lot here for like 30 minutes. So questions, comments here. Come on. Any questions about Kardec, Napoleon, anything? No?
John, I have a question. Might not refer to it, but what about Allan Kardec's mother?
Yeah, the information.
A spiritist. Did she teach Allan Kardec, or was it that, how did this?
So Kardec's father disappeared during the French Revolution. So in the French Napoleon in the war. So Kardec lost his father when he was very young. It is not in the revolution because he was born in 1804, but from that time until a little later, the father disappeared in the Napoleon Wars. So he was raised by his mother. He had, I think, I don't remember correctly, he had siblings or not, but she was, she had to sustain him, right? So she had to
protect him.
To work, to help in the family and everything. So her merit was to send him when he was very young. I think he was 13 or 14, to study with Pestalozzi. But because of course we know very little about young ages. But we can imagine that he was already a very bright child, very interested in subjects, in learning, in studying. That's why she saw the necessity of sending him to Yverdon to study with Pestalozzi, right? He was living in Lyon. Lyon is closer to Switzerland than Paris, right? So it was easier for him to go back and forth from there. And we actually visited the place that he studied in Yverdon. We went to Yverdon some years ago, and there is no signs of Kardec there. It's a lot about Pestalozzi, but no references to Kardec, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
But so I maybe Jussara has more information, because she does more of this research on the early ages of Kardec, but I don't really know anything else about his mother. Okay. I don't know if Louise, if you have more information, you researched anything else.
No, I don't know anything else about his mother, unfortunately. I never focused on that. Sorry about it.
Yeah, I don't, you can ask Jussara in one of her studies, and she'll tell you a little bit more. I know she has more information about him. Okay.
He had to have a beautiful mother.
Yes, definitely.
This comes from, fortunately, from the beginning in his young years.
Yeah, but also another very important person in his life was his wife, right?
Oh, right.
Yes, Amélie Baudet, who was, I think, 10 years older than him or something like that. And they never had children. There is some research being done in Brazil now, in a lot of documents, unpublished documents on Kardec, that they think that they may have had a child and lost, but it's not, they couldn't find definite proof yet. But as far as you know, they don't have any children. But she was a great supporter of his work. And for those that watch the movie Kardec, we see her there in the movie, right? And she continued preserving after his death the work for another. She lived to a very old age. She died when she was like 90 or something, 80s. So Amélie Baudet was a very important figure also, but that's a different story.
Okay, thank you, John. Okay.
Okay.
I wanted to ask.
Yes, Marilyn?
Yes, when Kardec passed, was he a wealthy man? Did he leave a great amount of wealth?
No, he was, because of all the work that he did in Spiritism, all the resources that he had received from the books were reinvested in Spiritism. He was not wealthy at all. He had some money from the books that he published before. Actually, before Spiritism, he opened he had a business with his uncle to spread, to teach kids, and it was a education institute. And his uncle robbed him everything, and he was forced to rob him and everything that he had, and he was forced to close this institution. So he lost everything and had to start all over again. And when he started Spiritism, he was receiving some resources from this work that he did as an educator, and he continued receiving that. And of course, when he published the Spirits book, it was a success and sold a lot of copies. So he had some resources from the Spiritist work that he was doing, but he always used that to spread Spiritism, to invested everything back into Spiritism in the publication of the new books and everything else. So he never became wealthy, but he was he was not struggling financially in terms of needing people to help him. He had enough to survive and do his work, of course, with the assistance, we imagine, from the spiritual world, in order to to for him to be able to continue doing his work. Okay. Yes, Carol.
Yes, and apparently he used his own pocket money for all the travels, because occasionally I guess he did the rounds in France to visit some of the spiritist centers there. I don't know if they're called centers, but the communities that were well established in spiritism. So, I mean, he was a clean theme completely, really. It's great.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, there is that book that was published, right? The Spiritist trips, right? That he did, the book that we have in English, The Spirit's Voyage, talks about this trip. Is a very interesting book. And yes, he used his own resources to travel. He didn't use everything that he made in Spiritist books was reinvested in the renting of the space of the Parisian Spiritist Society, in the publication of the new books, in the dissemination of the dogma. He would send money to the Spiritist centers that were struggling. He would send money anonymously to help them to survive. So that's also a part of what he did. Kardec definitely is an evolved spirit, and so the work that he did was also with a higher purpose all the time, without any personal advantage at any point. Okay. Okay. So, yes, Luis.
Regarding question about Kardec's mother, actually, I found a page in the Paraná Spiritist Federation. Paraná is a state in Brazil. That's essentially an historic research about the parents of Kardec. So a lot is said about the judge, that was his father, and Jean-Louis Duhamel, that was his mother, and it goes on and on. It's fairly long. So if anybody's really interested in that, it's a place to find it. Unfortunately, it's in Portuguese.
Can you put the link here? Because I'm going to put it on the chat.
I will do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very nice.
So we spoke a little bit about, we're going to talk a little bit about the 19th century. The 19th century is a very important century in the changes that happened in everywhere in the world. And again, wars after wars after wars. You read about the century, the number of wars that you had in the 19th century. We see here at least 50 different wars that happened all over the world in the 19th century. We talk about wars today, that the world still have wars, but compared to what was 200 years ago, we barely have wars. We had two great wars, world wars, that really caused a lot of harm, and really, they were barbaric. But we have come a long way from that. And if you look at you do some research on the 19th century, you'll see how many wars we had that ended up forming all the countries, most of the countries we have today. So you have the Europeans invading everywhere, right? The domination of Africa, of Asia. One of the most violent wars, actually, that killed most people in the 19th century was a Chinese war that happened against Japan, that killed millions and millions of people. You have wars here in America, in the Americas, not in North America. I'm talking about the Americas. You have war in Mexico. You have the wars in South America. You have wars between Cuba and Spain. You have the big war between France and Germany in the 1870s that result in the formation of Germany and Italy, and France lost some power that would be recovered in the First World War in territories. So, you know, it's a history of wars, the 19th century, but it's a history of progress also. The Taiping Rebellion in China killed 20 to 30 million people in the bloodiest conflict of the 19th century, just as an information. But you know, in terms of religion, arts, in terms of scientific progress, the 19th century was very important, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. So, Soraya, you read for us?
Yes. The 19th century, after the revolution. With Napoleon gone from Europe's political scene, the Congress of Vienna met in 1815 to adopt sweeping measures for rebuilding the European nations. Diplomacy led to the memorial accomplishments by taking advantage of the glorious experiences of those years of extermination and revolution. Louis XVIII, Count of Provence and brother of Louis XVI, was placed on the French throne, re-establishing the old dynasties. The church, too, got its share of the large inventory, restoring to it the countries where it had founded its perishable reign. A breath of peace reanimated these collectivities exhausted by fratricidal battles, making way for the indirect intervention of invisible forces in the patrimonial reconstruction of the great nations. Many reforms, however, were implemented after the bloody activities that had begun in 1789. Such renewals were more extensive and numerous in France especially. Besides benefiting the government of Louis XVIII by replicating the English system, several other liberal principles of revolution were adopted, such as the equality of citizens before the law and freedom of worship. These reforms establish a reign of individual responsibilities in the mechanism of every sector of the state, in addition to all its political and social advances. Accustomed to all the arbitrariness of its dogmatic nature, even the church acknowledged the limitation of its powers regarding the masses and resigned itself to the new situation.
Okay, so 1815 was when Napoleon was deposed and was sent to Elba, the first island that he was exiled to. So in this Congress of Vienna is where they established the who owns what in Europe, what countries own what. And there's a peace treaty that was important to delimitate Europe and prevent more destruction and war. Of course, it worked for a certain period of time, but the European countries, what they did was to organize themselves and start invading and dominating especially Africa and Asia, that was still parts that were still not under the control of the Europeans. It's when the Britain Empire starts to grow and becomes what it was by the end of the 18th century, the largest empire on earth, reaching from Americas to Asia, India, and everything under it, right? So, but at the same time, you can say that liberalism, which is political and moral philosophy based on liberty, consent of the governed, and equality before the law, became more and more the law of the countries that are becoming more independent. This is all based in what we studied before about what happened in Britain, especially that the monarchy became less and less powerful in terms of allowing the common citizens to have some say. Of course, when you talk about Britain in the 19th century, you have to talk about the Queen Victoria, right? That was in power throughout most of the century. And the Victorian laws and Victorian customs are still very, very much in control of the day-to-day citizens. It's not like today that the monarchy in the UK is absolutely figurative, has no power. In the time of Queen Victoria, it still had some power, still have some say into day-to-day business, but it was not an absolutist monarchy. It was not the king and God being one. Well, in England, the church and the king is the queen is the head of the church, but in the religious sense, not in the political sense. The monarchy was much more liberal, and that spread throughout the other countries in Europe, most of them abolishing monarchy on and off throughout the 19th century. And when we talk about the religious domination, which is important part here, the church in the 19th century became less and less relevant in terms of political domination. Still had a lot of influence, still had a lot of say into day-to-day behavior of of people, and we see that when this lasts much longer than the 19th century. We go to the 20th century, and you still see the church dominating a lot of the social behaviors of humans. But the important thing, what they lost in the 19th century, was the political power. So the church lost almost all the political power, ended up with the Vatican as their small state, right? And Italy became independent of the church. And still a lot of countries adopting official religions in Europe as the Catholic or the Protestant religion as the official religion, and following a lot of the impositions of the church, but in terms of moral and social customs, not in terms of political interferences. Okay, that's the important part of what happened in the 19th century with the church. For instance, if you talk about France, with the French Revolution, they lost everything. And then as Louis XVIII, after Napoleon was placed on the throne, it's a very interesting part, right? From 1815 to 1830, he was the king again. They went back to the monarchy, but it was a constitutional monarchy. The king had not any absolute power. He shared the power with the assembly, and he was still a ruler, but he didn't have as much power as his brother and those before him. And the church also got back some of the properties they had and some of the power that they had. But on and off again, as as we go through France, after Louis XVIII, you have the nephew of Napoleon becoming an emperor. So you have other movements in France between monarchy, republic, and emperor, and finally, by the end of the 19th century, becomes a republic. I believe it's called the Third Republic or something like that. I don't remember exactly. But that's what was happening in France, and the Congress of Vienna. It was important to establish new national borders, and but the important thing is the reforms allow the progress of the individual responsibility So we had a lot of political and social advances. In terms of the world, someone asked, I don't know, I don't remember, is one of our lectures on Saturday, why Kardec, why Spiritism appeared in the middle of the 19th century. You know, by everything that we are studying here, you can imagine, right? Again, we know that the spiritual world is working with us in terms of everything that happens in this world. Of course, we have our free will, and we just saw the free will in the case of Napoleon, what can happen in the world. But Kardec came in the middle of the 19th century in Spiritism, because by what you read here, you imagine that 100 years before, it was impossible for Spiritism to appear. It would be burned at stake, Kardec and all his followers. So you had to have some sort of religious freedom and freedom of ideas to bring something so revolutionary like Spiritism, right? That really challenges the established beliefs and the established rules of the church, right? Spiritism didn't start as a religion, and that's very important, because people, especially in Brazil, consider Spiritism to be a religion. And we insist here that always that Spiritism is not a religion. Spiritism is a doctrine that has three aspects: the scientific, the moral/religion, and the philosophic. And another thing that, talking about scientific philosophic, another thing is very interesting that I found out when I was preparing for this class, is that the term scientist was actually created in 1833 by Mr. William, let me find the name here, it was very interesting. Oh yes, William Whewell. He created the term scientist. He coined the term in 1833. Before that, the term for scientists were called natural philosophers. So philosophy and science was kind of mixed. And it was this professor, this scientist, and that coined the term. He was an English scientist, priest, interesting, right? Philosopher, theologian. He was an Anglican priest, so priest in the Church of England, and historian. So he created the term scientist in 1833. We know the word alchemists, right? The word that existed way before, since the very ancient times, that for those that made experiences with the chemistry. But the word scientist was coined in 1833, which I find it very interesting, right? So, of course, as we have the sciences starting to become independent, and we have all the science progresses, with Darwin publishing The Origin of Species in 1859, which, if you read the Spirit's book, 2 years before Darwin, the Spirit's book was already telling what Darwin was going to publish 2 years later, right? A lot of the things. You have Pasteur with the first vaccine against rabies. Very interesting that we have vaccines discovered in the middle of the 19th century, and vaccines is such an important topic that we are talking about it today, right? The importance of vaccines started in the middle of the 19th century. The atomic theory by John Dalton, another figure that we saw there in the book of, in the message, one of the figures that were there in the reunion between Kardec, Napoleon, and the Spirit of Truth. Faraday, Ampere, Maxwell, all the discoveries in the 19th century, that the creation of electromagnetism, thermodynamics. All of this happened in the 19th century. So with all of this, you see the relevance of Spiritism appearing when it appeared in 1857. It could not have come before. Again, we don't need to be exact on dates, but it could not come 100 years before. And it was the right time. It was the time that people were prepared to study outside of the impositions of the religious aspects, where science was also moving completely away from God. Science from that time until today denies God and everything that is related to spirituality. For those that watched yesterday's lecture by the United States Spiritist Federation, very interesting, a very scientific lecture.
Very scientific.
That is worth watching.
Oh, it was excellent. It was truly excellent. Wow.
Yeah, it's really worth, and then and these are the things that Spiritism allows us to study and to discover and to research, right? That differentiates and tells us that Spiritism is not really a religion, because we can talk about this scientific aspects, the discoveries that science is doing nowadays. And these people like Paulo Bispo that did the lecture, yes, they are the scientists that are trying to bring spirituality into science with very little success. We know that, but we have to start. You start putting the seeds there. And André Luiz's books, especially Evolution and Two Worlds, is a book that science one day will look at it and be amazed how in 1958 the spirits were telling everything that science was going to discover later. So just I took an affluent here to talk about why Kardec brought Spiritism in the middle of the 19th century. Everything that was happening at that time allowed Spiritism to be brought at that time. Okay, any comments, questions here? All right, so let's talk a little bit about the Americas.
Political independence of the Americas. Most of the peoples of the planet that had been following the course of these events sought to eliminate the last vestiges of monarchical absolutism in order to approach Republican ideals or to implement a constitutional regime that restricted the powers of rulers. The Americas, destined to receive the sacred experiences of Europe for the civilizations of the future, sought to apply the grand principles of French philosophers to their political life on their way to a more complete emancipation. Following the example of the English colonies, the four viceroyalties of Spain struggled for their own independence. In Mexico, patriots would not tolerate any other king than their own. And in South America, with the action of Bolivia and the deliberations of Congress of Tucumán in 1816, the colonies of South America proclaimed their political freedom. In 1822, Brazil too raised its banner of emancipation with Pedro I, attended to the mission of the Brazilian people in the civilizations to come. It is worth noting that the efforts of the invisible plane in maintaining Brazil's territorial integrity while the rest of the continent was being split into smaller republics.
Okay. So talking here about the Americas, right? We talked a little bit about the independence of the United States and everything that this country brought in terms of revolutionary ideas and ideas of freedom also by the forefathers of the United States, right? So it's important here for us to remember that the United States became independent before the 19th century. The other American colonies became independent in the beginning of the 19th century, many of them through wars. The domination in the Americas were divided by the English here in the north, France, parts of Central America and parts of the north, and Spain and Portugal from Mexico down to South America. So the wars of independence were bloodiest in the places dominated by Spain, especially in Mexico, and where we have today Peru, Colombia, and Venezuela and Ecuador. They were all part of the Colombian Empire that Simón Bolívar was the great liberator of all these countries, ended up dividing themselves in several smaller countries. Then you have Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, Peru, Argentina, Chile, and Paraguay. But the part that was dominated by Portugal, which was mainly Brazil, and the expansion of Brazil into the rest of South America, Brazil managed to maintain its territorial integrity without dividing itself. And according to the spirits, the reason for that, one of the main reasons for that, first, Brazil didn't had wars of independence, had little battles here and there, but it was a Portuguese prince was the one that proclaimed the independence of Brazil in 1822, and he ended up returning to Portugal to become the king of Portugal. He was Pedro the First in Brazil, and then he became Pedro the Fourth in Portugal. And his son was the emperor of Brazil for the most of the 19th century, was a great ruler. A lot of the advancements that Brazil have was because of him, and he ended up being deposed when after the abolition of slavery and when Brazil became a republic by the end of the 19th century in 1889. But it managed to stay as one country, and spiritually speaking, what is said is that when Brazil was being prepared to receive Spiritism in the event of problems in Europe that in the end happened, right? The two big world wars. The First World War caused a lot of harm to Spiritism, and the Second World War ended up erasing Spiritism from Europe practically. And at the same time, in Brazil, Spiritism starts to grow in the beginning of the 20th century. And that, in my personal opinion, thankful to Francisco Xavier, it became what it is today, a very well-known doctrine in Brazil, much more than the rest of the world, right? So, and in order for Spiritism to come, to not die and to spread again, you had to have a country and a population where, you are going to send a lot of people abroad, and there are millions of Brazilians abroad, and many of them are responsible for bringing back Spiritism to a lot of the European countries and other countries in the world, this country also. So again, it's a mission of the country as a whole, not a mission of an individual, but a mission of the country to just disseminate again these teachings that are very important, that did not originate in Brazil, but they were brought to Brazil, and the independence and the Brazilian territory being the large country as it is, allow it to preserve Spiritism as it is known today. Okay. This was the Americas. Anything, any comments, questions here? Yes, Carol.
So, I mean, I guess there really wasn't such a direct connection from France to Brazil. It became more through a spiritual influence. I always wondered about that. Why Brazil? I never quite understood that. And the Portuguese connection and the French connection, the difference. I didn't understand that.
Yeah, you know how everywhere in the world, everyone look up to the US today, and everyone wants to, you know, they're both jealous and they want to copy everything that happens in the US. That was Brazil and France in the 19th century, okay? The monarchy in Brazil, the language was French. Spiritism in Brazil in the first 20 years was only disseminated in French. All the meetings were in French. So Brazil and Brazilians, up to today, I would say, have a lot of admiration for France and for the French culture. So that it's on the physical side. On the spiritual side, it is. We find in one of the books of Emmanuel that millions of the French spiritists and others reincarnated in Brazil after the wars and during the wars and everything. So it's a combination of a very strong interest in from Brazilians into French culture and everything France, related to France, and the reincarnation of the French people in Brazil that you, of course, you, even if you don't remember, you bring the past with you. You know, on my personal experience, you work with me in the mediumship meeting, and you know that I don't have any ostensive mediumship, any ostensive things. You know that I'm assisted and helped by spirits all the time, and you see proof every week. But you know, the only place in my travels that when I arrived, I felt like I've been here before, the sensation of déjà vu, that, you know, it was Paris. The only place everywhere I went in the world, and I've been to a lot of places, the only place that when I arrived, I felt I'm back home was Paris. I was 16 when I went to Paris for the first time. And I arrived there, and of course, I wasn't a spiritist. I had no interest in anything spiritual. And I had no understanding of what I was feeling. But there's something I never forgot, was this sensation that I was feeling home completely. And I love Paris until today. It's probably my favorite place in the world, together with Venice. And you know, I lived in London, so I really like London also. But you know, so you see there that there are strong connections, and everything is worked out to be prepared. The spirits, when they take care of the reincarnation process, there is a bigger plan. We are just small instruments of this plan, and with our free will to do what we want or not, to choose our own paths. But you know, in terms of spiritism, Carol, this again, my opinion. Can you imagine if spiritism, instead of Brazil, goes to Paraguay, a small country with 3 million people? It dies there, right? There is no way of spreading. You have to go to a country that has 200 million people, where you can create enough mass of people to preserve it and to eventually spread it, right? And there is also one thing that is advantage/disadvantage of Brazil is the syncretism, religious syncretism. I don't know if you understand what. Brazilians are very used to mixture, a lot of things. So they are open to any spiritual ideas that seems appealing. So we joke that a Brazilian will go to Spiritism center in the morning, to a church in the afternoon, and to African one of the African religions in the night, and you are accepted and open to all of that. So you have to be flexible. There is, in other places, you find the religious followers are very strict. They do not venture outside their religion. They're very closed in their beliefs. Either they have their own spiritual religious belief or they don't have any. They're not flexible to look at others. And Brazilians are very flexible, very open to that. The disadvantages of that is that they not, in the end, they don't focus on anything. They are a little bit of everything and never study anything seriously.
Yeah.
But those that do and end up, being open to this possibility. So in Brazil, if you have an obsession there will always be some friend or someone that will tell you, go to a spiritist center, and you never heard of it before. You hear about it, you don't know exactly what it is, but eventually you can go to a spiritist center. There are spiritist centers all around, right? So, that's, and again, everything that I'm saying here is my opinion, okay? It's not everything, it's not anywhere. You are not going to find written anywhere. It's my opinion throughout these years that I've been thinking about why Spiritism is spread in Brazil and it's not somewhere else. I think it has to do with the population, with the French reincarnation, but especially with the openness that Brazilians have to all different spiritual teachings, I would say. I don't know if Luis, you can talk a little bit. What do you think about these thoughts that I'm sure you reflected about it. But make sense or not?
No, it does. I don't think I have anything to add. One could ask, why Brazil and not another large country? I wouldn't have an answer to that. I think in some ways it was a decision made, it was a direction. I don't know. I really don't know. But the openness that our society has to those aspects that you mentioned, João, I think it's key. I mean, I've lived in the US, and I think it would be much harder in a country such as the United States to have that flexibility of ideas.
I think you ended up in a spiritist center, also because there was a spiritist center, right? Because someone close to you knew about the spiritist center. That's how it happens to most of us in Brazil, right? Jussara ended up in a spiritist center also because her mother took her when she was very young, and her grandfather was a spiritist. I don't have any spiritist in my family, and I ended up being a spiritist because of a marriage, right? Nothing else. But because I became a spiritist outside Brazil. But
I remember part of Soraida's history from
Right.
that event, and I can tell that my case, maybe it's something in a sense similar. I was very aware of the spiritual side of things since I was a kid, 10 years old. I've been with mediums, not spiritist mediums, but mediums many times. But to come close to a spiritist itself, it was much later in life. And actually, is as João mentioned, because my daughter came to me and said, well, I think you should go. And I went, and that's what happened. So
the rest is history.
I think I am so glad that life turned around and brought it here to the United States. Because you imagine, I think before that we were just not ready for this. I mean, why in Europe and not here? I believe people here were not ready to understand spiritism and everything else that involved all that we're learning now. Is that not true? Is it because we weren't ready and it started all in Europe and France and not here?
Well, no, it actually started here, right? Kardec says that it started, the Fox sisters started here
Yes,
because,
that started.
yeah, because the country was open to it. It was the only country that at that time that would be open to these ideas of spirituality. But what the US was not, I don't think it was prepared, was for an organized doctrine, let's say. Again, here when I say the word doctrine, we're talking about not doctrine in the sense of indoctrination, that is a dangerous word in this country, but doctrine in the sense of a combination of philosophy, science, and religion, that is spiritism, right? I think that this country was ready for the connections with the spirits. And still today, right, Sarah just mentioned on her lecture at the symposium that $4 billion are spent every year in looking for connections with your spiritual dead relatives. There is an article on CNN that I just received today talking about exactly about that. They lost their loved ones to COVID. Then they heard from them again. It came on CNN. I'll post the link on the chat for you to see. For those that want to open it, it's it's incredible that it's still it's out there, right, today, and here in this country, still being explored. But again, spiritism goes beyond that.
Yeah.
And for you to go into that, and you are here, you, Carol, Marilyn, that are here with us, you have to go beyond the communication with the dead. You go into the philosophy. You go into the moral aspects. You cannot stop in the communication with the dead. And I think that's where it stopped here, and that's why it didn't go further here. But again, completely my opinion. Don't just take it with a grain of salt, because it's my opinion. It's not anyone's. I didn't read anything. It's just me talking about it. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Very interesting, fascinating, indeed. Thank you.
I was trying to open. Now I open the chat here. I'm going to post here. See if I can post the article.
Okay.
So I think we continue next week, right? Because we have 5 minutes left next month. Sorry.
I think religious leaders in this country are very opposed to spiritism. I find that anytime I mention being a spiritist, it's like, oh, a curtain falls down.
Yeah.
People are aghast. You believe that? I'm not going to use the expletive, but you know which one I mean. I mean,
Yeah.
I think in the witch hunts that we had in this country, probably a lot of those people were mediums. They weren't bad people.
Of course. Yeah. I'm sure they were mediums. Yes. They were not witches. Witches does not exist. They were mediums. Yes. And because of their mediumship, they were burned at stake, right? The witch hunt that we have. Yeah. And yes, Marilyn, it's very difficult because the struggle that we have in spreading spiritism here is exactly that. Those that have the religious beliefs and are very strict on their religious beliefs, they don't want to listen to these things. They don't want to even entertain the discussion. And those who do not have the religious beliefs, and but they, they believe, they see the communication with the spiritual world. Many of them are not interested beyond the phenomenon, because Spiritism challenges you to go beyond the phenomenon. The communication with the dead ones, so-called dead ones, is not the focus. It cannot be the focus. It's a consequence of the work. It's part of the work, an important part, very important, and that's why we do this work every week on the mediumship meeting. But you have to go beyond, and the moral aspect and your evolution as an individual spirit is what really Spiritism allows you to study and to bring to yourself. So not many people, for different reasons, are willing to do that here. And again, another thing that I think, that's again my opinion here, I think that this country is more open to things that come from Americans. Things that come from the outside are not very easily received here. So, and Spiritism is pretty much a Brazilian thing here still. So it will take some time. We'll have to, the youth has to start bringing it more, and maybe when we reincarnate here, as I said in the Spiritist Symposium, when we reincarnate here in this country, our next time, we can spread it a little bit more. And we hope we find a more fertile ground, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I
So
think
yes,
regarding what Marlene just said, behind other religions in US today, there are the churches, and the churches, they have a power structure and a powerful influence that they want to preserve. And spirit as it is, without churches, without hierarchical structures, without priests, it is a very challenging, I don't want to use enemy as a word, but it's a very challenging concept, because it could make all that, be in danger. So it's an endangering idea, let's say that. I think a lot of the resistance that there is in US and also in Brazil from other Christian churches and tabernacles, yes, has to do with that. I mean, it is challenging how we will fight an idea that does not aim to have power, but has strong concepts and is based on a solid Christian morality. It's tough.
Yeah, just Marlene and Soraya and Carol know that a little bit, but we spoke before. In Brazil, the evangelicals are the main persecutors of Spiritism nowadays. They chase Spiritism, and they say that all spirits are, all the work come from devil, and all these things, that they are really. It's not a war, an out war, but it's they are very strong against all the Spiritist ideas in Brazil, and as they are growing strongly in Brazil. Brazil used to be a Catholic country, and nowadays it is still a Catholic country, but the evangelicals are probably like 25-30% of the population already. And they are becoming an important voice in everything that happens in Brazil, and they are very strong against Spiritism there. So,
well, they're trying to become a political force here in the US as well.
Yeah, they are in Brazil. They already have a lot of influence in Brazil, and I know they are here also. We know by everything that's happening, especially in the South, right? And I know you live in Texas, so there it's a strong political force also. Yeah.
Okay. I know, like you know, in my own situation, my own family definitely pushes that. But, you know, to be a free thinker and to find the truth, that's my goal, my mission. And, you know, I'm grateful that I have found the opportunity to be with Spiritism and through SGNY. It's major for me. And, you know, the other things I have to just kind of let it go, push it back, and, you know, make my own choices. So, you know, it's great. I'm grateful.
Yeah, like we always said, right? You are not going to waste your time discussing with people that are not interested in listening. They are just interested in imposing their own ideas. But those that are open to discuss and open to ideas, then those are the ones that we're going to discuss it with, and are going to try to bring the ideas, right? All right, very interesting. Thank you all. The few of us that were here today, thank you all for being part of it. You do our final prayer, Carol?
Sure. And first of all, we wish all the fathers and the grandfathers a happy Father's Day, and may they have a blessed day. Infinite Creator, Supreme Intelligence, and First Cause, we are grateful today to be together for our studies of Spiritism on the way to the light. We are studying this day about Napoleon Bonaparte and the influences that he had, some very, very important influences, the important developments in Europe in the 1800s, although we know that perhaps he did not quite fully rein in that purpose in the best way possible. His mission was merely to start the process. There was more than power, as we know, more than authority, more than military might, more than political actions. There are much more things that were needed in terms of science, the arts, and greater thinking. We are grateful for what we have learned today, and we know that Allan Kardec was coming through at the perfect time to bring and spread Spiritism. Before that, it would not have been possible. We are grateful for what we have learned, and we are grateful for the wisdom of Allan Kardec and his contributions to Spiritism. We humbly are grateful also to our own spiritual benefactors, the good spirits, the mentors, the helpers, the healers, and our guardian angels who are with us, guiding us and inspiring us, helping us to have courage and helping us to have discernment, that we may also assist and help others in their journey to find the truth. May we continue our studies throughout the week, our prayers, our mindfulness, and may we share with greater compassion, greater listening, greater intuition through the guidance of those who bring us this wisdom. May we give great thanks for what we have received through mental, spiritual, physical, and emotional aspects of our lives. We are all those, we are not just one aspect. And may we continue to bless these teachings, never take them for granted, and continue our studies. We ask humbly for the love, light, and peace of Christ to be with us. And may we go forth now in safety and protection to family, friends, loved ones, and co-workers, reminding ourselves to be beacons of light. Go forth today in peace, so be it.